Some men keep asking the same question in different disguises, and it never leaves them alone because it shows up in every arena, in work, in relationships, in discipline, in the mirror, in the quiet moments when nobody's watching. And the question is always the same, even when the words change. Why do some people seem almost prone to success, while others feel like they are inclined toward failure, even when they have the same opportunities, the same intelligence, the same time? There's an unnamed way certain men carry the answer without calling it a theory, because they've felt it, they've watched it, they've lived long enough to see that life doesn't respond first to what a man wants, it responds to what a man believes he is. And most men don't even know they're living inside a belief, because belief doesn't feel like a thought, it feels like truth, it feels like identity, it feels like just the way I am. And once a man says those words, the door closes quietly behind him, and he starts calling a prison a personality. That's what makes Maxwell Maltz interesting, because he didn't start as a philosopher, he started as a surgeon, he started with faces, with scars, with symmetry, with the outer structure that people swear is the reason they feel what they feel. And then he noticed something that shouldn't have been possible if the world worked the way most people assume it works. He noticed that two people could receive the same external change and walk away with completely different lives. One man would stand straighter, speak cleaner, take risks, accept opportunities he used to avoid, and another man would remain the same internally, still shrinking, still apologizing, still hesitating, still carrying the invisible story that says, I'm not that kind of person. That observation is a blade because it cuts through the modern obsession with fix the outside and the inside will follow, and it reveals something colder and more useful, that the inside often refuses to follow the outside until the inside receives permission, and that permission comes from self-image, from the story a man is living inside, the one he doesn't tell people, the one he doesn't post, the one he doesn't even fully admit to himself, the story that runs in the background and decides what feels natural, what feels allowed, what feels dangerous, what feels impossible, what feels not for me. This is the unnamed way, the quiet reality that a man's life is shaped less by his intentions and more by his internal calibration, because the mind operates like a guidance system, and a guidance system doesn't respond to wishes. It responds to targets. It responds to what it has accepted as true, and if the accepted target is small, the life will return to smallness no matter how many bursts of motivation appear. Because motivation is a wave, but identity is the ocean, and the ocean always wins. That's where the separation begins, without insults, without drama, just a clean dividing line between two ways of moving through life. Because some people live as if their identity is fixed, like a label applied in childhood, like a verdict handed down by one rejection, one failure, one embarrassing moment, one season of weakness, and they continue to obey that old verdict long after it stopped being accurate. And other people live as if identity is something that can be trained, refined, rebuilt. And that second group doesn't always look confident. They just look governed because they don't treat feelings as facts and they don't treat old stories as destiny. The reactive mind wakes up and checks for evidence that the old story is true, and it always finds some, because it's looking for it, because the mind loves consistency more than it loves freedom. So if the story is I'm unlucky, the mind will highlight every setback and ignore every opening. And if the story is people don't respect me, the mind will scan for disrespect and miss the places where respect was offered. And if the story is I'm not talented, the mind will interpret struggle as proof of inadequacy instead of proof of growth. And then the man calls that reality, when it is often just selective perception wearing a serious face. A governed mind is different, not because it denies setbacks, not because it pretends life is fair, but because it understands that interpretation is power. And Stoicism has always known this, long before modern psychology put different labels on it, because the Stoics weren't trying to control the world, they were trying to control the lens. They understood that the event is one thing, and the meaning assigned to it is another thing entirely. And meaning is where a man either becomes stronger or becomes smaller. This is where the mirror shows up, because every man has patterns that repeat until they're understood. Patterns of hesitation, patterns of self-sabotage, patterns of pulling back when he's close, patterns of over-explaining when he should stay silent, patterns of shrinking when pressure touches him, and most men think these patterns are about discipline. They think they just need more willpower, more motivation, more external pressure, and they don't realize that behavior follows self-image the way a machine follows its target. Because the subconscious mind will always drag a man back toward what feels like him, even if like him is miserable, even if like him is limiting, even if like him is beneath what he consciously claims to want. That's why some people keep failing in predictable ways, not because they love failure, but because success would require them to become someone unfamiliar. And unfamiliar feels unsafe, and safety is the oldest addiction on earth, because safety means staying with what the nervous system recognizes, even when it's not good, even when it's not true, even when it's just familiar pain. So Psycho-Cybernetics lands like a quiet weapon for the right listener, because it doesn't flatter, it doesn't beg, it doesn't hype, it simply states that self-image is the software running the machine. And if the software is outdated, the machine will keep producing outdated results. And that's why a man can read 100 books, watch 1,000 videos, feel inspired for a day, and still return to the same old behaviors. Because inspiration doesn't overwrite identity, it only visits it, and identity sends it away when the discomfort arrives. The hunter-trader archetype, when you strip the labels off, is simply the man who waits, observes, and executes only when conditions align. And that archetype doesn't only belong to markets, it belongs to life itself, because some people chase constantly, needing movement to feel alive, and others move with timing, letting clarity assemble before action. And this is what the hunter-minded man understands, that imagination isn't childish, it's strategic, because imagination is how the mind rehearses, how it builds internal evidence, how it creates familiarity with a new identity before the world demands proof. Maltz noticed something that most people miss, that the nervous system often responds to vividly imagined experience as if it were real, which means a man's internal rehearsal is not fantasy, it's training, and training is what changes what feels normal, and what feels normal is what a man returns to under pressure. So the man who keeps imagining himself as weak will keep acting weak even while hating it. And the man who starts rehearsing a calmer, more competent posture begins to find that posture available in the moment it's needed. Not because he manifested it, but because he trained the system. This is where discipline stops being effort and becomes identity, because the men who actually change don't just collect ideas. They repeat the same internal calibration until it sticks, until the mind stops arguing, until the nervous system stops resisting, until the new response becomes familiar and boredom becomes part of the process. Because boredom is where most men quit. Not because they can't handle pain, but because they can't handle repetition without immediate reward. And the men who can handle repetition become dangerous, not loud dangerous, quiet dangerous, because they become consistent, and consistency creates outcomes that look like luck to people who never stayed long enough to compound. And this is where success starts to feel less mysterious and more mechanical, because the prone to success people are often just people whose self-image allows them to keep going without treating setbacks as identity threats. They fail without collapsing. They get rejected without writing a tragedy. They struggle without calling themselves broken. They adjust without shame, and they maintain a sense of direction. Because direction is what keeps a mind from drifting into reactive living, and direction is what keeps a man from living as a passenger inside his own days. Sense of direction, understanding, courage, charity, esteem, confidence, acceptance. Those aren't just nice words. They're the internal architecture of a man who can endure friction without losing himself. A man who can walk through seasons where results are delayed without concluding that he is doomed. And this is what the listener starts to recognize when he's paying attention. That the story he's living inside is not a private poem, it's a control panel. And every day he touches that panel whether he realizes it or not. Some people will hear this and immediately want a checklist, a technique, a quick fix, because the reactive mind always wants an external lever. But the hunter-minded man recognizes something deeper, that the real work is not chasing new tools. It's becoming the kind of operator who can use any tool without sabotaging it. The kind of operator whose self-image is accurate and grounded, neither inflated nor crushed. Because inflated self-image becomes arrogance, and arrogance collapses under reality, and crushed self-image becomes avoidance, and avoidance collapses under opportunity. So the curiosity question becomes personal in the right way, not how do I become someone else, but what story am I obeying without realizing it, and what evidence am I selectively collecting to keep that story alive, and what would change in my posture if I stopped treating feelings as facts, and how many of my limits are really just old conclusions I never re-examined. And once a man starts noticing that, he can't fully go back, because now he can see the moment the old story tries to steer him. He can see the instant his mind turns a temporary emotion into a permanent identity. He can see the way one rejection becomes, I'm unlovable. The way one failure becomes, I'm not built for this. The way one awkward moment becomes, I'm not confident. And when he can see it, he can separate it. And separation is where freedom begins. If this hit, comment, Hunter. Hit like if it feels like you. Subscribe if you want more of this calm, stoic, hunter-minded psychology, without hype, without performance, just the kind of framing that stays useful when the day gets heavy. Some people will understand this instantly, and if you did, you already know why.